Welcome to this update on the HSP Research Program for September 2021. I'm Frank McEwen, President of the HSP Research Foundation. Circumstances with security made a rebuild of the website necessary in mid-year, with the result that it's now 6 months since we last reported. Back then we were still struggling to secure the drug supply for the Phase 1 clinical trial. That hurdle has been successfully overcome, with the drugs now stored with the pharmaceutical supplier in Australia. On the administrative and funding side, an estimate made at the start of the year of likely costs for the Phase 1 trial was around $300,000. On that basis, we proceeded with planning and funding. In June, we circulated detailed documentation of the clinical trial plan to the different types of suppliers and service providers needed to conduct the trial, for the purposes of getting quotes from them. By the end of July, we had quotes for the 8 major activities involved in the trial, with a total price tag of over $800,000. It's fair to say this came as quite a shock. We know that the demand for early phase clinical trials to be conducted in Australia has increased substantially in recent times, with many biotech companies in other countries looking to Australia for clinical trials, given our relatively low pandemic impact here, compared with many other countries around the world. We also know that both public and private healthcare and medical research priorities have been redirected towards control of the pandemic and protection of the population, and rightly so. The downside, from our point of view, is that a Phase 1 clinical trial into safety and tolerability is now vastly more expensive than expected, and there would be no guaranteed starting date for a trial in the current circumstances. Clinical trials are normally conducted in hospital settings that are subject to varying levels of restrictions depending on the status of COVID-19 at any given time. With this backdrop, the Foundation Committee made the decision to not go ahead with the clinical trial at this stage. That decision was not taken lightly. Behind that decision is another important factor, and that is the need to be able to fund and conduct the next stage, a Phase 2A clinical trial, before giving Phase 1 the green light. What we get out of the Phase 1 trial are answers to questions on drug safety and tolerability. Can we proceed to test the drug on people with HSP or not? It is not until the Phase 2A clinical trial that the question of drug effectiveness in people with HSP is put to the test. Assuming that the Phase 1 trial is successful, there needs to be planning and funding already in place to conduct the Phase 2A trial. With the recent escalation in costs for the Phase 1 trial, it is certain that the pricing for a Phase 2A trial will have blown out as well. As much as the Foundation Committee would wish otherwise, the decision to not go ahead with the Phase 1 trial at this stage is unavoidable. We also need to apply stiffer tests to the evidence supporting proceeding to clinical trials with the candidate drug. The due diligence and level of evidence required to approve $800,000 in funding is a lot higher and more rigorous than for $300,000. That process is underway, and we are ever mindful that money for a clinical trial comes from members of the HSP community. In somewhat brighter research news, Dr. Gautam Vali has had multiple successes with biomarker development over the last 6 months. The biomarker in SPG4 HSP that he has been working on for the past 3 years has now been validated as a measure of the effect of drug treatment and will be used for this purpose in the clinical trials. Another achievement is the validation of a high-throughput test, or assay as it is known, that he developed, and this is essential for precise and reliable sample analysis in the clinical trials and potentially for broader application as well. Gautam has also just had a scientific paper published on applying machine learning to collectively over 100 physical characteristics of HSP cells. This approach holds promise for improving HSP diagnosis, for creating new biomarkers, for drug discovery, and for classifying participants for clinical trials. Turning to SPG7, Gotham established cultures of stem cells derived from nasal tissue samples of people with this form of HSP. He has now successfully differentiated these cells into forebrain neurons using induced pluripotent stem cell technology. The same path as for the SPG4 studies, with the next step being drug discovery. Also on the research front, the Foundation is facilitating global collaborations aimed at developing gene therapies for rarer, more severe forms of HSP in children. Gene therapy appears to be coming of age as a viable treatment option with the potential to cure at least some forms of HSP. However, there are big challenges to face regarding safety, effectiveness, and affordability before gene therapy for HSP and other diseases can be used. For some forms of HSP, including the most prevalent ones, drug treatment remains the most promising strategy to pursue. For more detail on this research program update, read the accompanying website article. Finally, some in the HSP community have expressed concern about getting vaccinated against COVID-19. We have consulted neurologists familiar with HSP and closely monitored health department advice over recent months. The overwhelming consensus remains that people with HSP, a higher risk community, get vaccinated to protect against more severe health consequences, and encourage your friends and family to do the same. The risks associated with vaccination are extremely low, while the risks associated with COVID-19 infection are both high and serious. If you have questions, consult your doctor. Until the next update, take great care. Bye for now.